I'm not a tech dude. I have to figure all this crap out. All right. All right. All right. All right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I know you can hear me. Can everybody hear Mr. Jim Bob, and can everybody hear me in the chat? Y'all. We're good. We're live. Yes. Can you hear him though? I want to make sure is his audio good?
Hello. Am I good?
Make sure his audio is good. Jim Bob, what's up, dude? How you doing?
Hello, Jay Dyer. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, dude.
Well, I invited myself onto your show, and then and then I was like, I should have him on my non-show that I don't have. I just want to talk to you because it's like
Okay.
I went on Boiler Room a while back,
Yes, I heard that. I
and
remember that.
they mentioned you, and then I was just kind of like watching you, and it's a lot of it's really in-depth stuff. It's not your ordinary YouTube stuff. So, and I have the I'm able to do it. I'm able to like I'm a jeweler during the day, so I set diamonds and stuff all day. So I just listen to
Gold all
in-depth.
over my chain, gold all
Yeah,
over my ring.
exactly. Yeah, I could make you a really gnarly chain.
I want a
Go with your
watch. I want a big watch to hang,
big budget.
like Flavor Flav.
Yeah. So, yeah, but thanks for making it happen.
So how'd you go from that to cartoons?
Well, I was always an artist. So I was back in LA. I've been in Colorado for like almost 4 years now. I started drawing when I didn't know my political stance. I was a godless, like roaming schmuck. Um, and I was just doodling stuff. And most of it was like they're still participating in a capitalist system. So, and then he said,
They kind of all have aspects of truth to them. So one thing that philosophy does is that it kind of you're trying to ferret out the wheat from the chaff. So are there aspects of libertarianism which are true? Yeah, but one of the problems with libertarianism is that it comes from out of the milieu of a materialist paradigm. It comes out of Enlightenment thinking, out of Enlightenment puricism, out of laissez-faire, right? And all these ideas are part of a worldview that you can actually trace historically to certain people. One of the things that, for example, David Hume, the great Enlightenment philosopher, said, the great skeptic, who's actually more consistent than the Sam Harris, typical sort of atheist today, is that you can't get an ought from an is. So the fact that something is a certain way, you can't logically leap to the way that and say therefore that it ought to be, because once you start saying oughts, it requires value judgments. It requires universal categories and standards. And one of the things that the Enlightenment philosophers wanted to get away from was universal categories, concepts, metaphysics, these kinds of things that are very necessary to philosophy, to worldviews. When you talk, for example, about rights, natural law, those are immediately bringing in metaphysical ideas. Even if you don't want to believe in metaphysics or don't think there's metaphysics, you're already in that domain. And once you kind of have from the outset this position of, I want to talk about metaphysical things, but also I don't believe in and I won't allow anything metaphysical in my system. That's a very contradictory position, and that's why the last 300-400 years of Western philosophy, I believe, has gone the way that it has. Why it's become so decadent and so degenerate, and the train of ideologies that you see from Enlightenment to Darwin to Marx to Freud, it's the same degenerate type of cycle that just sort of, it's almost like history is ideological thought, or excuse me, ideology becoming more and more consistent with itself over time. That's how I see it.
Right, yeah. And also science is an is. Like the results of science is an is,
Yeah.
but it's hijacked the ought
Yes.
recently. Actually, I don't know if it's recent or cyclical. Like, hasn't this already happened like a couple times? As far as we are, I was reading, I think it was during like Newton's phase where, they all believed in a God and they were discovering God through science. and the order of the universe and nature. And the language, there was the word of God, but then how God's expresses himself is through this nature that we see. And then the science people, the lab coats, they got in the way between people. They became the spokespeople. They were like, if you want to talk to nature, you got to go through us. Like, if you want to talk to this amazing miracle that we're looking at and interacting with, you got to go through us because we know better. We're gonna talk for you. And that's kind of just stuck, it seems. It's the more money they get and the more monopoly over language they get, and the more distant they make access to science between like the lay person. It creates an authority. It creates like an appeal to an authority, because if you just make it confusing enough and you make these people special. And it's the same with like math too. I was thinking about this, is that a materialist argues that everything that they can, see and touch and feel using science and all this stuff is the real and only thing. But then I was thinking, the only way you can access those things is with an immaterial user interface like math. So I guess it would be in a Platonic philosophy view that math is abstract. It's not material. It's just a thing. It's just like this stuff that we pull and try to make sense of what we're seeing. So it seems antithetical or contradictory to be a pure materialist, but rely on complete immaterial language and math and all of that to prove that materialism is the only thing. It's really, it's a mind fuck to me. It's like and I don't know where that argument exists. Like, I looked up, like, for the first time, like, nominalism. And it's really fun to like look at all this stuff and see it in plain terms, as opposed to just like trying to like listen to you or anyone else. Like, it's easier to digest like one word at a time. But there's something I started thinking about that, and I was like, I don't know if Jay's already covered all of that, of course, but that's where I am. I'm just like looking at all of these things and what's abstract, what's not, what's abstract, what are you saying is real based on an abstract access point,
Yeah, I think that's a great jumping point to leap off. There's aspects of Platonism that are accurate, that do touch on the very things that you're talking about. One of the insights that Plato had was, it's pretty clear that something like the number 7 is not located in a certain place. And so it has a kind of a quality to it that's different than physical things. But it does seem to interact with the physical world in some way, right? We have 7 objects. Obviously, there's some property of 7ness there, but we can't just locate 7 there or on a chalkboard. If we erase the number 7 on a chalkboard, it doesn't go away. So there's something permanent, there's something abstract, something conceptual, something invariant about numbers that's unique to those types of things. And then we can actually move out to other types of things that are very similar, like laws of logic. Laws of logic are immaterial, they're invariant, they're conceptual, they're abstract. And so when we try to squish these kinds of things into the material world, it leaves us in all of these stupid contradictions and boxes that are self-defeating. And that's one of the things that philosophy does, is that it comes along and it says, it's really impossible to be coherent, to be consistent, to be logical and rational, the very thing that all the atheists think that they alone have and possess. If you have those assumptions and those presuppositions, it's self-defeating. So it does open the doorway, as somebody like Roger Penrose, who's a mathematician, Platonist type of guy, he actually says, when I learned about advanced mathematics, Mandelbrot sets, fractals, he said it was clear to me that humans weren't socially constructing these things, they were discovering these things. And so what that shows is that there is a realm, a mindscape, something that whatever terms you want to use, that go beyond just the material, and even mathematics in terms of like dimensional math, right? So there's mathematics that deals with geometry that deals with higher dimensions. We don't we can't see them, but the mathematics points to them. So all of that kind of stuff definitely points to the reality of a spiritual realm, the reality of things that we know from not just the Bible, but other religions too. So I find, yeah, that's a great jumping point into the possibility of, spiritual realities and moving beyond the idea that the only thing that we can know or do know exists is pure matter. That's just completely self-refuting. The easiest way to refute that from just a basic philosophy standpoint is just to point out that almost everybody who has that view believes that in what's called empiricism. And empiricism is just the basic view that the only things that we can know with any certainty, and they don't mean absolute certainty because they don't think anything is absolutely certain, but they're absolutely certain of that, is to actually to press that point and to say, you believe that we can only know what we know from sense experience, but the problem is that idea, that proposition, that truth claim is not something that you can know or prove by mere sense experience. And so it becomes at a very fundamental paradigmatic level circular.
Right. Yeah. Circular. Yeah. That's what it sounded like. Yeah. But it's convenient. I mean, I could see, I was at that place once. I think my whole time in Los Angeles was like that. It was almost prerequisite. It was like anything goes, everything's fine. There's nothing real. I can bend every form of morality. It doesn't matter. Like all of this is pure nihilism, sells itself as like freedom. And liberty, and it's total nonsense because like that's kind of where I abandoned libertarianism as a utopian view as I saw it. It was that I know that men are flawed and people seek power. There are people who are going to use force to get what they want, and then there are going to be people who don't, and they're going to pretend that a really deep conversation is going to get everyone on the same page, and there's going to be a beautiful compromise. And it's like, that's not how that's not it either. And I used to think that too.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You remind me of the debate that I did with Kokesh, the well-known libertarian. We did a debate a few years ago, and we had this line of argumentation going, and I'm like, look, dude, so you're basically saying that when you have kids, I can put up a giant billboard right next to the sand lot where your kids play of giant dildos going inside of goats or some shit, and there's nothing that you can do about it because it's on my property. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Then we got to the point of culture creation. Hello, very well-known term. Something that the deep state has done for a long time, and he had no idea what I was talking about. What's culture creation? As if he doesn't know that the deep state, the CIA, has been bound up with Hollywood for decades. They've been engineering culture creation for a long time, and yeah, it's completely absurd to think that the other nations are going to adopt the NAP. Dude, are you familiar with world history? What's the second oldest profession in the world?
Prostitution, or
the second
oldest.
Prostitution.
That was the second. What's the second?
Being a spy. So countries, people groups are going to engage in subversive activities and espionage. And that's not the world that the libertarian thinks exists out there.
No, they also realize a lot of them are turning out to be, in my experience, relativists. Like,
exactly.
It's like the freedom to be a hedonist and do all this shit, but not be a liberal. Like, yeah, those stupid liberals. But it's like, the more free a culture is, or a family or a society or community, the more disciplined they need to be with their moral foundation. Like the reason government takes over is because you break down the moral foundation that's usually upheld by a hierarchical system: God, man, wife, family, community. And they've really done a good job at breaking that all down. And like you said, like I don't know if we'll ever know to the extent to which these intel operations are working, or how many. I mean, you heard of that guy Arnon Milken? Like, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name.
The director who, it's a well-known story.
The stuff is like known. They even throw it in our face. Like
it's in my book. Yeah,
it's insane. Like the even the movie, the George Clooney movie, where he was a talk show host, but he was also like an operative. It's like they're laughing at it, and I know there are actors who get tapped on the shoulder. Hey, you want to be a part of something bigger? You want to be a part of something bigger?
Yeah.
Maybe they don't know the full extent of what they're participating in, but.
Well, it's funny because that's in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. That scene is in there where the guy comes to George Clooney at the beginning. He's like, "Hey, man, you love your country."
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah,
Exactly.
we got plans for you. And so yeah, he ends up being a hitman basically for the CIA.
And those are perfect people because actors, they are left at the mercy of writers and directors. They're not saying their own lines. They are presented huge, right? Like
They're
they're
handled.
seen as huge, right? They're handled, but they're not personally doing anything. So they want to do something. That's why they get into these big movements because they need to do something bigger than saying some lines on this movie. So it's really a perfect scenario. It's a
Yeah.
really perfect scenario.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I had a lot of examples of that in my first book, and that's because you can tell that they, just like the recruitment for like an intelligence agency is very similar to, and they like people who have acting skills because of the fact that you can pull it off, and a lot of those kind of people are narcissistic. So a narcissistic person is more than willing to go along with these things for his own personal gain because he doesn't actually have any objective standards that he believes in or lives by. So there's always this Crowleyan element to libertarianism that people forget, and I think that's kind of what you were getting at earlier. I mean, again, that ties back into what Hume said about that you can never get an ought from an is, and I think you could fast forward several centuries to Crowley, who would say absolutely, do what thou wilt, and it is a libertarian claim that Crowley's making. He's not saying, "Oh, it doesn't actually mean that." Yeah, actually, it does mean that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of where I departed with that. And then I actually researched this guy who obviously don't agree with his affiliation or his solutions. His name was Carl Schmitt, but I read one section of his critique on liberalism, which he meant not in the Hillary Clinton, progressive.
Yeah, classic liberalism.
Yeah. And he said it was really perfect. He said, liberalism is organized indecision, and he got to the point where it was like all of these debates and conversations, and I'm a part of it. We're doing it to some extent right now, like this idea that the people who use force are going to play the same game as the people who are doing these really important conversations and winning people over with ideas and all this stuff. I'm not saying it's not important, but the reality is, it's a gross reality, is that there are people who use force and there are people who don't. And the people who don't, only one of those groups requires the other one to play, and it's not the ones who use force. Like, they don't care. They're not going to have the conversations. So,
Yeah, I
always
always
look
ask.
at that. I'm like, part of me is just like, and it's really in a critique of myself, or a version of myself, the intellectual masturbator, which that's not going to go away for me. Like, but at least I know what it is, and I won't ever get disillusioned as far as what it's supposed to do, because I'm no longer in the fight of like, we got to demolish the government. It's like, it was only like one scripture. It was like, give Caesar his, give God what is his. And it was like, it's so applicable because that's not your fight. I'm not willing to behave like a government to demolish the government. So, I'm part slave, but how I look at it is I have to create my life to a point where I'm willing to use violence to defend it, but not to like go take shit. You know what I mean? And I don't know what that looks like. It's just like, I have a family, so it's like, yeah, I would kill someone to protect my family. Would I go to jail because taxation is theft? No. So, that's where I abandoned it. It was like, if taxation is theft, that means and if you believe in the aggression principle, if taxation is theft, that is an aggression against you. So if you're unwilling to use aggression in response, then you kind of have to acknowledge you're full of shit, but to some extent, or just, that you have no power. One of the two, or both.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, and I was like, I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to start screaming that, because I can't behave as consistent with it at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one of the difficulties that is that we are several centuries into a philosophy that was really intent on overthrowing the pre-existing paradigm. So we're several centuries into a revolutionary ethos that wants to believe that both church and Masonic Lodge, right? That's why the revolutions of 1789, 1776, they were fully, totally inspired by Freemasonry, as was basically the entire spirit of the Enlightenment. Now, I would grant that a lot of the Enlightenment people had legitimate criticisms of the corruption of the Roman Catholic system and some of the degenerate European nobility. But the counter paradigm swing of the pendulum over here to the revolutionary ethos has basically kind of let loose this Pandora's box where for the last several centuries, again, we've had the overthrowing of all crown and altar in most nations and we have the establishing of democratic republics in most countries. And what you get with that is what Spengler called homo economicus. You get economic man naturally, obviously, in this system does not have any more dignity because you've gotten rid of those categories. He's no longer made in the image of God. He becomes an economic unit. And that's why Spengler was correct. I'm not saying everything Spengler says correct, but he's correct to say that you become homo economicus in that scheme, in that system. And materialism, that's why materialism falls directly into statism. And so I would say you got two possible dialectics in that. You can fall into radical anarchism, or you could fall over into the opposite extreme of total collectivism. And really, these are false options. They're both wrong because they're both based on atheism, materialism, false presuppositions. There's no basis as to why you should choose one over the other. And so anytime I engage with the libertarian argumentation, I just simply point out that if you start talking to me about non-aggression principle, you're talking about something that's immaterial, that's not physical, and you're trying to use it as a metaphysical qualification, a value judgment, and that doesn't exist in a subjectivist, relativistic worldview.
Right. So if you're going to take that, you might as well pick up one that works better.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that makes total sense. It's like I haven't finished this thought, but it was like there was something about getting a bunch of people in a country to operate only on the individual level that actually allows a form of statism that's slightly different than collectivism. Like that, it's like you're either pushing them to a big group or you're pushing them into these units, like you said, and it's easier to manipulate if they're all separated into units.
Right.
But if they all join in groups, in separate groups, that's like another level of like, oh, you can move. It's like a game. It's like, I don't know a good analogy for a game, but it's like you have single units and you have groups, and they have different properties, and they put up different fights. But I was looking at that, and I was like, wow, the fight really isn't a conversation. It's like reproducing and passing down your ideology and memes and like building it, because we're up against a generational game, like you said. Like if the Masons created these things from that long ago, are these just demons? I talked to Owen Benjamin about this. Like, what kind of person thinks about planning 300 years in advance? It's like, are they supernatural demons like that? Are they people that are given to darkness and they're not thinking about their direct families? Or I don't understand. Like, how can you plan that far in advance if it doesn't benefit you directly?
Well, in that scheme, they have what they call the great work, and they believe that they're going to perfect nature. And so in their system, modern technology is kind of the summation, the philosopher's stone of all this great work, alchemy nonsense. And basically they think that technology is kind of going to be the way that they save themselves, and hence the whole transhumanist stuff. But yeah, I would say ultimately it goes far beyond the machinations and ability of individual human beings to plan all this. It requires a greater sort of meta level strategizing, and that would be definitely satanic. I would say it's completely. I mean, Scripture has talked about this for a long time. This is essentially the way Paul talks about it. He says, in Ephesians, that we don't have a battle against flesh and blood. Ultimately, the battle is against spiritual dominions, thrones, powers, and principalities, which he's talking about the fallen angelic hierarchy. He's talking about Satan and his hierarchs. that are angelic entities, demons, basically. So absolutely, and that's why you see a consistent pattern of revolutionary ethos. What you see, the social justice warriors that you picture in your cartoons very well today, that if you go back to the French Revolution, that's exactly the kind of stuff the revolutionaries did. And you can go all the way back to ancient Greece, to when they would have these Saturnalian, Bacchanalian festivals, where they literally believed that they had to return to primal chaos, to the point of the primal chaos type of Big Bang thing, and that they had to intentionally engage in inversion and bestiality, all kinds of sexual nonsense that you could think of. And what that did in their mind was kind of regenerate nature. So they think that order and chaos kind of swing back and forth and necessitate one another. And so it's very dialectical. It's very Gnostic. So yes, it is demonic. And that also, I think, is a great proof, or testament at least, to the veracity of the biblical story, because it actually gives an explanation to how this is multi-generational, how it's spiritual, not just physical. It's also spiritual.
Yeah.
And it actually makes sense of things.
Yeah, it seems like almost non-linear. It applies at any given phase. It's like that's like kind of the power of it, where you're like, there's scriptures about, man believing that their knowledge surpasses like wisdom. Like everything we think we're getting now, as far as science and all this stuff, we're gonna perfect everything. We're gonna be able to use science to perfect humanity and all this talk. And there's no wisdom. There's zero wisdom.
Yeah.
It's just isolated, atomized bits that are specialized, which really dilutes all knowledge and all. It's weird how that happens, where the more specialized we get with everything, the knowledge of it gets smaller for each of us. And so we know a little bit of everything, and then but we know nothing. We have no wisdom, because we can't teach the kids the seasons and how the acid's going to affect the trees and the plants.
Yes.
And that's because would be generational. There's something scary, but I'm optimistic. I'm not a pessimist, because I think light wins always.
Oh, yeah.
and good wins. And they really, those people, I used to be like a futurist. I replaced God when I left my hometown at 20, and I got right into transhumanism and futurism and Kurzweil, and I surrounded myself with all these people who are very nice people, but their vision is just replacing God and spirituality with just the physical.
Yep.
And like you said, we're going to perfect everything. If you guys just submit to the big people who know stuff, we can build this for you. And it's just proven, it just goes bad.
Yeah.
And so I think they don't see it coming, that the new kind of enlightenment golden age of wisdom and spirituality is actually coming. It's on its way up. And they don't, the people who are detached and only interact with material are operating on a very low vibration, so to speak. So it's kind of exciting to be a part of it. I don't know where exactly I am, because I'm fairly new back to just spirituality. I mean, I was raised Christian, and I didn't read the Bible once. You know what I mean? Like, I just submitted and listened to my mom, and then rejected it without ever even investigating, which I think most people do with most things. I don't think it's peculiar to just religion, but it's kind of exciting. It's just something, there's like a revival about it that I can sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's absolutely no reason to be pessimistic. I mean, a lot of bad things are happening, but a lot of people are starting to figure things out. They're starting to realize that a lot of the systems that they've been sold don't work, and they're lies, and people are questioning everything. Sometimes that can go too far, but I think that's actually not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to question everything, because then we start to realize that, we have been lied to a whole bunch about big level stuff. Like, just in the last 10 years, even, I mean, for example, take something that's considered fringe and crazy, like geoengineering. Like I first heard about that in about 2006 or seven. I dove into it as far as I could at the time, and that was a totally fringe conspiracy theory. There was like two websites that talked about it. They were really shitty, looked like GeoCities websites. It was just a nightmare to try to find information on it. But it looked to me like, there are airplanes that are dispersing aerosol into the atmosphere. So fast forward to 2018, I read a book that is one of the official history of DARPA by Annie Jacobson. It's about 500 pages. I did a whole lecture on this, and turns out, yes, for a long time, ever since the 40s, they've been discussing the viability and potentiality of doing atmospheric aerosol spraying. And so one of the places that they tested that, according to Annie Jacobson, was in Vietnam. They sprayed Agent Orange as a bioweapon as a test. So they have known that they could not just manipulate the weather, but also utilize these sort of atmospheric sprays. And in the last year, Forbes, Smithsonian have already come out with articles saying, yes, oh yes, by the way, it's real. We do that. Oh, but it's to fix climate change.
Right.
But now, wait a minute. I thought that doesn't exist for the last 10 years. And if you even talked about it, you were the most crazy, insane.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I had debates with people for hundreds of comments, people going nuts. So you're a complete lunatic.
Yeah. I will, I'm really good at finding the things to question to lose a lot of followers at once. Like it's tested and approved.
It is difficult because a lot of people aren't ready for every red pill at once. They have to kind of go slow with
yeah. But that stuff, I remember looking at that and going, holy shit! Like, you know how many times I got yelled at for even even wondering. I wasn't even suggesting. I was just like, that could be. Why wouldn't a government agency test stuff and spray it in the air? It's like I didn't even add a nefarious intent to it. It was just like, that's likely.
Well, there's already declassified stuff that where the government actually did test spraying over St. Louis back during the Cold War under the auspices of fighting the Soviets. They actually sprayed a bunch of radioactive stuff over St. Louis. Now, that's well known. It's not doubted. It's declassified. Now, if they're willing to do that, if they're willing to promote weapons of mass destruction as a lie and, say it doesn't matter if we kill 500,000 Iraqi children, if they're willing to do that, you think that they're not willing to test on a large scale atmospheric aerosol engineering? Well, of course they are. They talk about it openly now.
Yeah. It's people pick and choose where the government is benevolent and when they're evil.
Right.
It's like, whenever it's just like, oh, they're evil there, but not here though, because they're trying to help here. There they had to do that, I think, but over here they're trying to help.
I'll tell you one thing that really red pilled me on libertarianism was a long time ago. I just started listening to kind of alternative media stuff, maybe around 2003, 4, 5, and one of the first books I happened upon was the authorized biography of the Rockefellers, and it was great because it was from the family's archives. It was okayed by them, and it basically goes through all of these things that they were involved in. I'm not saying the Rockefellers run every single thing in the world, but I'm just saying it was a great window into looking at how they influenced ecumenism and religion, how they influenced liberalism basically in religious arena, how they promoted family planning and all that kind of stuff, how they promoted the counterculture. Abby Rockefeller was a huge proponent of feminism. She got it going in the 60s. She put the family's money into it. And then on and on and on and on. I mean, and then you eventually, if you study like intelligence agency type stuff in depth, which I did my master's thesis on, you start to realize a lot of parallels across different spectrum. And you see that there's a consistency to the approach of very wealthy people. And one of the things that really red pilled me was I eventually got a hold of, on the libertarian stuff, I got a hold of David Rockefeller's memoirs, and he studied under von Hayek. And so he actually was a big proponent of libertarian stuff because, and I'm not saying it's all government or it's all private interests. Actually, the deep state or the people that control things, they run both of those. They're if you look at who's pushing the agenda globally, it's the Fortune 500. They're all aligned in the same agenda. So that's not a pro-libertarian thing versus government thing. It transcends government and private interests. And there is I was going to say
the richest corporations are the ones pushing socialism.
Yes.
Like the opposite of what, I mean, they receive social benefits from the government.
Yale in China is what Mao was, a Yali. There are Yale write-ups on Mao at the time.
Wow.
Yep. So that was a skull and bones CIA operation. In fact, we even know, declassified from the CIA, who trained Mao's guerrillas. It was Bill Donovan of the OSS.
So all these people just overlap and play with like
Yep.
they're basically on teams and they just switch jerseys and just go different places and do different operations. Like it's so beyond what the narrative, what we think we're
Right.
operating with here.
Exactly.
Like just day to day, because we operate day to day and week to week. It's like, can you imagine operating like 3 to 50-year plans, like
Right.
at a
Exactly.
time?
Here is the Mao piece. Yale Group spurs Mao's emergence. This is from Yale Magazine. Yale Daily News, 1972. Guess what? Oh, it just turns out that, yes, they loved Mao. So we were told that, oh, we got to fight the commies, the commies, the commies. Meanwhile, the CIA, the OSS, they were all propping up the commies. And on top of this, of course, is everybody wants to blame. I'm not saying that the Stalinism was good. It was bad. But one last little piece of of red pill here that I always like to throw out is that the OSS. We all know who the Frankfurt School is, right? Are you familiar
Yeah.
with? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know who brought them here? It was the OSS.
Oh, was they were behind the what's his name? Those two dudes who went to Santa Monica. I forgot their names.
Horkheimer and Adorno?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this is not a conspiracy site. This is Foreign Affairs Magazine, very well-known, well-respected Foreign Affairs Magazine. And who brought the Frankfurt School immigrants here to help us study culture creation? Culture creation. Who was it? Oh, it was the Frankfurt School brought here by the OSS. Wild Bill Donovan. There you go.
It kind of makes sense now if you thought something like that was happening like now, which it probably does, but it's more like spread out and harder to like find like and put all together. But then a lot of deceptive like little things to try to do if you're powerful was easier to do. Like you could just if you had the foresight of trying something like that, you could do it with the resources. It's not like it's like when I just don't like how people interact with conspiracy theories or whatever, even though the facts are right there.
Yeah.
As if it's hard to do, like to just go manipulate stuff.
Well, that's why what I did, because I encountered a lot of the conspiracy stuff when I was 18, 19, 20, 21 through conspiracy type movies like, Mel Gibson's Conspiracy Theory. I went and saw that when I was in high school. And I was like, oh, that was cool. What's that mind control stuff? I don't know what that is. And that kind of prompted, later reading books that dealt with the United Nations and socialism and how the United Nations promoted atheistic socialism and all this stuff. And so I was like, well, that's weird. Why would they, if the Rockefellers donated the land and supported the United Nations, why would they be for the United Nations promoting all this global socialism? So then you go deep down that rabbit hole, and it kind of takes you into looking at the New Age movement, the United Nations promoting the New Age movement through the Lucifer Trust, as it used to be called. And then that leads you to these kind of big scale questions, which is what I wanted to study in university. I said, you know what, I don't want to just be watching conspiracy theories on YouTube. I want to study this on an academic level, and that's what I chose to do. I chose to study espionage because what conspiracy research does is take you in the direction of learning how the world really works. And then you start to look into espionage, you start to look into how mafias work, because that's very important to the puzzle pieces here. And then you kind of, what that leads you to is these kind of big tomes that the important global elite have written. And that's what I focus on a lot. Is in the last couple of years, we've done 30 lectures on 30 important books from the top globalists. So this would be people like Miles Copeland, the CIA operative. It would be people like Jonas Salk in his books. It would be people like Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells. It would be, Jacques Attali. It would be Carol Quigley, who's very, very important. I cannot stress enough the importance of Dr. Carol Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown, and the archivist and historian for the Council on Foreign Relations. He wrote this giant book that's a defense of the elite in the 20th century. And he tells it all. He says everything.
The whole plan is always just like creating a perfect like society, right? I mean, Bertrand mentioned some of that. I read some of his stuff, and it was like, I mean, geez, he was his intention was so clear. He didn't even like dance around it.
Yeah. So basically, you could just say that there's about you could say a 5 to 10 point plank plan that all of the globalists of the last century and maybe even beyond the last century, you could go back into the French social theorists like Saint-Just and Saint-Simon. They were already predicting a world government back then. You can go back even to Kant. Kant wrote a whole essay about world government, in fact, as an Enlightenment figure. So you could date it back to then if you wanted to, in the Masonic ideas of world revolution and Weishaupt and all that. But the real clear planning is in the last century from all these top books. And if you wanted to have 5 planks, it would basically be they all agree, all these top writers, on the need for a global government, the need for depopulation, the need for a global currency, the need for control of all areas of life and technocracy. So basically, none of them disagree with that. And what's amazing is that there's perfect continuity. Darwin is also part of that, by the way. You have to believe Darwin.
Right.
There's perfect continuity for the last century. Go all the way back to the writers writing at the turn of the century, like H.G. Wells. And everything that they say is in perfect continuity with the last globalist book that I did a couple weeks ago was the big green activist theoretical physicist Fritjof Capra. I keep calling him Frito because he's such a weird name, but Fritjof Capra, he talks like Arnold Schwarzenegger on helium. He's like, Fritjof Capra, yeah, there is going to be a global government that are going to kill you all, but there is also the quantum reality, and in the quantum realm, we are all going to also be the gods. So we will be gods, and you will also be dead at once. It's crazy, man. He literally talks like a higher pitched Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he wrote this giant book back in the 70s, basically predicting what Elon Musk is selling us today, that we're all going to be one global hive mind and we're all going to be linked in. And it's going to be so great, man, because we won't have like war no more because we'll be like, all be one or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could speculate that different groups of people are all competing for that helm.
There's some competition, yeah, but they're all agreed on the end game. And so if you read Quigley, what happened in the 20th century was that it moved us into global power blocks. So and this is not just me, but a lot of other geopolitical writers talk about the fact that the 20th century is basically the Western Atlanticist power block eliminating its two main rivals, which was Germany and Russia. So the two world wars and the Cold War were engineered by the Western elite to destroy, weaken Russia and Germany, and it did that. So then what happened was it's now one large power block that's essentially trying to mop up the remaining oppositions that are out there. I don't think all the countries are completely controlled. I don't think every nation is totally globalist yet. If it was, they would go ahead and be converting it over into full-on globalism, which is what they want to do.
Well, no. The backlash is all this, retraditionalization, as some people call it, is going back to roots and holding on to them, which is being sold to people, like leftists and progressives, as like, you're a sick nationalist and all this stuff. It's like, no, like Poland is like, no, we're Polish, and Hungary is like, no, we're Hungary, and everyone is claiming, and it's being presented as like a racism, but really it's the backlash. No, we want sovereignty, and I want my best argument for borders is I want Japan to be Japan. I want to visit Japan as Japan. I don't want to see go to Japan and see a bunch of Swedish people who were rich enough to buy up the coasts or whatever. It's like I want cultures to thrive, but to do that you need to protect what they are, and you can't have a global government if you want culture, which is really ironic because it's all in the name of like multiculturalism, but it's really making a gray, dull soup of people, as opposed to like isolated, protected, like we go to New York, we go to Chinatown, we don't go to China, mix it with like three other things and get, order one of my jokes is like, we need diversity everywhere, and it's like we need spaghetti and burritos. It's like you can't do it like this. It has to be nodes, and they have to be isolated, and that's what we're seeing. And I think more people will get that. They might have to see something worse off first to be like, oh fuck, that's right. Like we're losing that. There is no more Chinatown. I can't enjoy it.
Well, one of the things I would recommend is there's a great documentary on Byzantium, and the West has really been cheated by not being given a good history of the longest lasting empire in the history of the world, the most successful economically, which was the Byzantine Empire, which was explicitly Christian. So no wonder it's suppressed in the West, because they want you to believe in atheism, they want you to believe in materialism, and then give way to total demonism and Satanism, right? So if you watch this documentary, which I put in the chat, what it shows in a very brilliant way is that there was always this conception of having a balance between the many and the one within the Christian imperium. So the individual nation states that made up the Byzantine Empire, like Greece or whoever, the intention was that they would retain their identity, but that their identity would not be set over against the universality of Christ and his message, right? So there's a central authority, but there's also a balance in the one and the many. So we don't ever want to fall into this sort of revolutionary many versus the collective one, right? There's the intent of being balanced.
position in their arguments.
Mhm.
And so could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your position?
You mean like personally about myself? Like,
Sure.
okay. Well, my name is Elias Ayala. My friends call me Eli, and I am 36 years old. I'm married with 2 kids and 1 on the way. I am a middle school and high school teacher at a Christian private school. I am also a youth director at my church here on Long Island, New York. And my interests are theology, apologetics, and a little bit of philosophy. And I am happy to be here.
And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation.
No problem.
So I've always been wanting to talk with presuppositionalists to hear their perspective because it's a really interesting perspective. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my position, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So let me just give you my little introduction thing that I've been working on. So my current position as an atheist is that none of the arguments or evidence used by religious apologists indicate a God at all. I don't just mean them not convinced. I mean, I believe they are objectively vapid and indicate nothing. They don't move the dial a single percent, a tenth of a percent, a hundredth of a percent, a thousandth percent. All of them collectively, when taken together, the cumulative case adds up to exactly nothing in my viewpoint. The reason I believe this is because omni properties like all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, eternal, necessary, divine aseity, pure actuality, pure perfect simplicity, all of those properties, those omni properties, are de facto infinite. So when you add them to an explanation, it gains infinite explanatory power and scope, or whatever criteria you want to come up with. It can just fill up and explain anything, and you can add these to any theory. So when they, like, a bridge of infinite length can span any chasm, and the only advantage that theism has over the naturalistic sciences are these omni properties, because science isn't allowed to use these omni properties because they don't have any explanatory value. But if we are allowed to use omni properties, the naturalistic science can also add them to scientific theories, and then they can explain anything with equal explanatory power and scope and probability as theism. So all arguments and evidence that indicate theism can also be equally answered as well by any other explanation that has omni properties, which you can add to anything like the flying spaghetti monster, deism, polytheism, pantheism, naturalistic pantheism, transtheism, diestheism, the multiverse, anything you want. So all of these have equal explanatory scope, probability, etc., or any criteria you can come up with when you add the omni properties to them, which make them, the omni properties, not very good to assess the truth of a theory, which is why science doesn't use them in any explanations. So if we allow omni properties, anything theology can answer, so can naturalistic science or any ideology. And without omni properties, anything science can't answer, neither can theology. And I can demonstrate this because any arguments or evidence you present for theism, I can show work equally or better, can be explained by the alternatives that also have omnis, like naturalistic pantheism. And because of this, I think we should do away with any omni properties, which I refer to as top-down worldviews. And we should only make claims about tentative additions to human knowledge that don't have these omnis in them, which I call bottom-up worldviews like science. So I think we should adopt a kind of fideism about these omni properties related to a God, just kind of a belief without evidence. And
did you say we should adopt
fideism?
Fideism?
Yeah, I think we should all adopt fideism and just say, if you want to believe in these omni properties like all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, we can't justify those, but you can still believe in them if you want to.
Okay.
So that's essentially my position. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, you believe Christianity is false, do you not? Or do you just refrain from making any statement in regards to its truth or falsity?
Right. I wouldn't say there is no God, but I would definitely say there is no Christian God.
Okay. And why is that?
Problem with suffering, I think, is a pretty good reason to reject the idea of the Christian God.
Why don't you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So if there is an all-powerful, all-good being, then there would not be involuntary suffering. There is involuntary suffering. Therefore, there is not an all-good, all-powerful being.
I don't see how that logically follows at all.
How so?
I don't see the conclusion following from the premises. It could be the case that God has a morally sufficient reason for allowing the suffering that does happen. So even if that's remotely possible, your conclusion wouldn't follow necessarily from those premises.
Right, and I would say I can disprove that, and I could say any sufficient reason God may have can be made morally superior if you make it voluntary. Therefore, it's not possible for there to be a morally.
How do you measure a standard of moral superiority without an objective standard to do that with?
I do have an objective standard. I wrote a model of objective morality.
Okay, so if you could explain, what is your objective model for measuring what is superior morally and something that's immoral, for example?
So anything, morality is essentially any involuntary imposition of will is an immoral action.
Can I just interrupt? I do apologize.
Go for it.
Can you just speak a little slowly so that I really want to follow what you're saying?
Sure. So any involuntary imposition of will is an immoral action.
Okay, can you explain that in a little more simpler terms? So any what?
Forcing someone to do something they don't consent to is immoral.
Okay, and how do you know that that's immoral?
Moral intuition and moral progress.
Okay, whose moral intuition? I don't have a moral intuition that that's true. So
Everyone's human, all human nature is moral intuition. The same moral intuition used in the moral argument.
you know that everyone's moral intuitions agrees with that standard of what's considered right or wrong?
Oh no, many people like psychopaths don't have moral intuition, but the same moral intuition used in every moral argument in all of philosophy. I'm using
Right, but when I consider God being who he is and he creates beings in his image, I don't see, or intuitively I don't intuit that it's morally wrong for a creator who owns that which he creates to do whatever he pleases with it.
That's called slavery. That's by definition immoral. So it's obviously immoral.
By whose definition is it immoral?
Everyone's. It's just moral intuition, moral progress.
Well, not mine, because I don't define that as slavery when it's in relation to God and man. So
that's fine. You don't have to agree with the consensus.
That's true. That's true, and I knew we would. I knew we wouldn't agree. But by what standard? You said everybody. So how does everybody agreeing with that as being the standard make it the standard?
Well, just the best arguments we have for objective morality right now are moral intuition and moral progress. That's the only kind of evidence we have. It's not great, but it's the best we've got.
Well, I don't think it's a valid point to say that because everyone thinks that's morally intuitive to them, that's a valid standard by which to judge what God does to be moral or immoral. I don't see that connection at all.
That's fine. You don't have to agree with it. I'm not
okay.
asking.
So
my position is that if you said that you don't believe that it would be immoral for God to do what he wants with the things he creates, is that accurate?
Yeah. If God created and everything belongs to him, I don't see it immoral for him to do whatever he pleases with what he's made.
And I would just say it's objectively, clearly a better situation where he can't involuntarily force people who don't consent to do things that they don't want to. Like if you want to be part of his world and do what he wants you to, that's totally fine. But he can't. It would be objectively immoral for him to force anyone who doesn't want to be a part of that world and to do what he wants.
According to
the world would be a better place if the world would be a better place if every individual got to decide for themselves whether they wanted to be a part of that kind of a world or a different kind of a world.
How do you measure what is better or not better? How would you do that objectively?
That is the standard. Every individual, any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. So any world that has least involuntary imposition of will is the better world.
And why should anyone follow that standard, especially people who disagree that that's the standard?
If you disagree that's the standard, then you can be in your own world with involuntary impositions of will. So it's totally a possibility.
Okay. All right. We'll move on from there. Thank you. And thank you for slowing down a bit, because you're like me when I teach. I tend to talk a little quickly, and people are like, what? You know? All right. So what would it take for you to say, hey, Christianity is true? What kind of evidence would be acceptable to you?
Well, it depends. Like, there's a contradiction between the all-powerful and all-good thing. So Christianity, in my position, is like a square circle. It's kind of impossible. But I could definitely grant that there was a being who created the universe. That's potentially possible to demonstrate with evidence. It's possible to demonstrate Jesus rose from the dead with evidence. But I would still see that Christian God as a rather evil, malevolent being.
Okay, so there would be no way for one to prove the Christian God to you, since you believe that the very concept of the Christian God is incoherent, and you base that upon the fact that the God of Christianity violates an objective standard that you have arbitrarily set up. Because I don't see how your standard is actually an objective standard that can make judgments on whether what God does is right or wrong. So I don't see a logical incompatibility with an all good God and an all powerful God. I don't see that as logically incompatible, for the simple reason, as I stated before, that God could have morally sufficient reasons to allow the suffering that he does. Now, I might not know what that reason is, but the very fact that that's even possible doesn't necessitate that there's a logical incoherency, since to my knowledge is that the idea that there is a conflict contradictory conflict is not a position that's widely held. That's why most people bring up the probabilistic problem of evil as opposed to the logical problem of evil.
Right, I have a minority position on this one, but yeah, I can demonstrate that the sufficient reason argument fails because I can subvert it by saying any potential reason God may have to allow suffering can be made morally superior by making it voluntary.
But
Therefore,
that's arbitrary.
no, it's not. This is
Oh, yes, it
slavery
is.
is objectively immoral. Like anyone who
It's
says
not-
otherwise is
you
objectively
can't-
wrong.
Well, again, that's by divine fiat. We trust that
I'm okay with that. It's just it's
Character.
obvious to everyone. So
No,
so-
I don't. Well, it's not obvious to me since I don't see how you can just say, well, that's just objectively evil. And if I ask you, how do you know? You just say that anyone can see that it's evil. I don't.
right,
I don't.
if you don't intuitively understand that torturing babies is wrong and that slavery is wrong and that harming people is wrong, then
Right.
I mean that's kind of on you. I can't really help you with that one. It's
Yeah, that's
it's
fine.
obvious enough intuitionally that say, yep, this is obviously immoral.
Yeah.
This is obviously objectively immoral.
Right. Now you are sure that my position as a Christian is that in the cases you just brought up, I do think those are immoral, but I don't equate the situation between God and man as those particular situations. You just assume that. I don't. I don't
Well,
see
all those things were
babies-
done
I
by
don't
God.
I'm sorry. Can I just finish my thought?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry. I don't consider torturing babies for fun on par with God creating humanity and making stipulations on humanity and moral laws that he requires them to follow. I don't see how that is equivalent to slavery. Now, say for example, you still consider that slavery. Okay, how can you judge the moral character of, if we grant Christianity, an omnipotent being who is himself the standard of right and wrong? How could you, within that worldview, make a moral judgment upon the one who is actually the standard?
Euthyphro dilemma. It can't be the moral standard. It's not even possible.
Okay, why don't you unpack that for me a little?
I wanted to talk more about presuppositionalism more than the.
Well, we're engaging in presuppositionalism right now because I'm asking these questions because I think you're bringing a lot of assumptions into the very reasons why you reject the coherency of Christianity. So this is, in a sense, presuppositionalism. I'm trying to apply it to your specific objections.
Well, I've done like entire videos on justifying my morality, and it is my unique viewpoint. It's kind of hard to go into in detail in a short time period.
Okay.
But yes, I do have justifications for it, and essentially, killing babies is always wrong. 100%. Don't ever do
Amen.
it.
Yes, amen.
God killed babies. God is immoral. Done.
No, there again, you are mixing categories. Now,
No, God flooded the earth. God drowned millions of babies.
yes, I know the rhetorical.
So I mean, from that, for me, it's just sufficient to say, nope, it's not impossible. It's not
Right.
even possible. It's done.
Right.
So I
with
mean,
no objective moral standard.
I
Okay.
have remember, I have an objective moral standard. That's fine.
Well, if it's what you just said, I don't see how it's objective. But if you'd like to move on, good.
Wait, you don't see how killing babies is immoral?
No, that's not what I said. Because if anyone knows, Christians believe that killing baby, if I kill a baby, that's an immoral act because I have violated a command of God.
Right, and I'd say that killing babies is always immoral, no matter who does it, including God, which means God killed
That's
babies.
right,
God
because you presuppose a moral standard that is above God, which is a contradiction in terms if you are reasoning within a Christian worldview. Now, if you're not reasoning within a Christian worldview, then you're bringing a moral accusation upon the Christian worldview, and there's a problem with arguing a worldview while throwing sticks outside that worldview. What you need to do is hypothetically grant my worldview and show a logical inconsistency within that worldview to show that there's a problem. And the reason for this is that presuppositional apologetics doesn't engage a tit-for-tat argument over evidence. We are setting principles against principles, foundations against foundations. So everything you say, from your perspective, I'm going to reject because I have a completely different interpretive grid. Likewise, any evidence that I can give from my particular perspective, you're going to reject because you have a different interpretive grid. So there, at that point, we need to engage in internal critique of worldviews. Otherwise, we'll just be talking past each other.
Right. So my argument was that killing babies is always immoral, no matter what, independent of God. Whether God exists or not, it's immoral. It's immoral above and beyond God, above and beyond everything. It can't ever be made moral. It's always
Right.
immoral. So God did it. God's immoral.
Yeah, that again, that whole system presupposes a standard of morality that is over God, which I think is incoherent when we're talking about a God who is the source and standard of all things. If I grant the truth or possibility of that position you just expressed, I'm not granting you a proper. Well, I don't think you have a proper understanding of what Christians mean when we say God. From my perspective, God is ex lex. He's above the law. He's a standard of the law. So he
Oh,
can't
right.
violate the law, since to violate the law is to violate a command. God does not issue commands to himself, and so when he acts in various ways, he does not violate any command.
Right. So my argument is that from my perspective,
Mhm.
it's clearly obvious that killing babies is wrong, and there's nothing that can justify that ever, no matter what. So even if God was the standard, if he kills a baby, it's still wrong, because our moral intuitions just show killing babies is always wrong, no matter what. You don't get an option, you don't get an out. Doesn't matter if God's the standard. If God does it, God's moral. Because
Okay, well,
so
you
but
can
that's
say, yeah, I don't see how that logically entails from your position, but if that's your position, then we would just disagree at that point. I don't think
right.
what you're saying is logically valid when you consider the nature of worldview critique. You're just assuming your worldview and then imposing how you define those things onto my worldview, and I actually reject those premises that you used to describe morality, obligation, and the nature of God and things like that. So if you'd like to move on, we could. If you don't, if you want to finish a thought, you can do that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to move on, because I mean, this is why it's harder to go into morality. Because for me, it's obvious that killing babies is wrong, and nothing can ever justify that. No.
Same for me. Same for
So,
me. Yeah.
so if God does it, God's immoral, and there's no
Right.
out.
That's a logical
no,
thought. There we go.
no
Okay.
logical way out of that.
Sure. Well, I disagree with you, but we can move on to a next segment there if you'd like.
All right. So could you give me the presuppositionalist approach to addressing the arguments?
The presuppositional approach to addressing the arguments. I
Like,
don't know what that means.
so they like, you start with God, you start with the belief that there is a God, and that's required to have knowledge or something like that.
I would say that the Christian worldview is the necessary prerequisite for intelligibility, which I'm sure you're familiar with that phraseology. So in other words, the Christian worldview is the context in which knowledge makes sense. If you deny the Christian worldview, I would argue that you're stuck in some form of skepticism, which would make everything that you say, science, philosophically, history, and all that kind of stuff, would give it no basis to be justified in believing those things.
So why can't I just presuppose a different God and say that that's the basis?
Yeah, you could, and that's where we would go into worldview analysis. So, for example, one of the
Wait,
criticisms,
why would we go into worldview analysis? Why is that relevant?
right? Because, well, here's the thing: the one of the criticisms of presuppositional method is that it works well. Now, you're going to disagree with this, and that's fine, but it works well against the atheist perspective. But what happens when you have another theistic position? And so we would engage in worldview analysis. Well, let's hear the Muslim position, and we would ask the same questions. Does the worldview of the Quran provide the necessary preconditions of intelligibility? And as I would interact with a Muslim, we would ask certain questions, just as I would ask you questions, to pull out your foundations and see if it actually provides the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. And I'm saying that the Muslim God doesn't, the Mormon God doesn't, and of course we'd have to get into more details to flesh that out.
All right, so let me go with naturalistic pantheism, just an eternal, all-powerful nature, and say I'm going to presuppose naturalistic pantheism and that intelligibility is a function of the universe, just like gravity. It's the law of gravity.
Okay. So what is that? What is naturalistic pantheism? How would you define it?
Eternal, all-powerful nature, just God without the consciousness, essentially.
Eternal, powerful nature, and
Eternal, all-powerful.
okay. And how would you know that this is the foundation of reality? This naturalistic pantheism.
How do you know God is?
I'm sorry?
How do you know that God is?
By the impossibility of the contrary. I'm asking these questions because I think the concept of naturalistic pantheism is incoherent. And I just want
then I would say that I know it because of the impossibility of the contrary.
Yeah, but you can't prove something transcendental in the same fashion, since the thing that you're positing has not in any way revealed itself. So there's no connection to the noumenal aspect, that foundation of naturalistic pantheism, to the particulars, you as an individual. You see, this was the problem with Plato when he had the realm of ideals and the realm of the particulars. He had no way of bridging the ideals with the particulars because he lacked the revelatory God.
Wait,
what is Christianity? That's an element that Christianity has, in that we can be connected to the noumenal by revelation to those that are part of the particular.
What does revelation have to do with truth? Like, you can have truth, like there could be a naturalistic pantheism that had no revelation and still be true. So you don't need the revelation.
Right. Well, you're saying could be, and so that presupposes possibility. Now, within the Christian worldview, God is so foundational and necessary that which is possible is actually based on God himself. Possibility exists within my worldview under God as opposed to over God. And what I mean by that is that God sets the parameters for what's possible and impossible. If I were to assume that there is a possibility that stands over God, then within my worldview, I would be affirming something more ultimate than God, namely contingency and possibility, which is inconsistent with my worldview. That's why I say the God of Christianity is necessarily true.
All right, so I would just say that in my worldview, naturalistic pantheism is the measure of all things that are possible. And suppose something outside of it is possible would be outside of my worldview, essentially just mirroring everything you said about naturalistic pantheism. So I don't need any revelation for that.
Right. Well, yes,
why do you need?
Sure. Go ahead. Finish your thought. Can you repeat the? I know. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to show that anything that I can say from my position, you can just posit from your position. And what I'm trying to show is that's an illegitimate move because revelation is a necessary aspect of that. Without a revelatory aspect, which would also include the personal aspect, there would be no way for you to know if that's the case. And so you still have contingency that is the foundation of that perspective. Whereas on my perspective, contingency doesn't stand over my God. My God is the very standard upon which probability and impossibility and possibility are measured.
So I don't understand anything you just said there. So you said that you need revelation for something. Why do you need the revelation? Because
revelation,
like there's a difference between epistemology and ontology. Knowing something is true and something actually being true. Something can be true independent of us knowing it's true. So the revelation is just irrelevant from the truth of the thing.
No, I don't think it's irrelevant. I think from the Christian perspective, revelation is what connects the noumenal world to the world of particulars. Without that bridge, your guess is as good as mine. Now, practically speaking, I would assume that perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong. You would hold to some form of practical knowledge because your worldview doesn't warrant a metaphysical understanding of the way things actually are. So we can talk practically just from conversation to conversation, but when we're talking presuppositionalism, then we're getting straight to the foundations. Whereas there's a difference between epistemology and ontology or metaphysics. I would say they both stand into a feedback loop relationship that if the world is a certain way, metaphysics, then that is connected to epistemology, whether we can we know things. If you don't have a view of reality, then how do you know the particulars that you claim to know? Because what you know presupposes the world is a particular way. So metaphysics presupposes epistemology, and epistemology presupposes ontology or metaphysics.
Right. So I'm still not seeing the relevance of revelation here. So things can be true independent of us knowing they're true.
Well, things can, yeah, sure. I don't.
So I can presuppose something without revelation, and it can be true.
It could be true, but without the revelation, you have no justification for knowing it to be true. I believe you know a lot of.
That's what presupposition means. A presupposition is an argument that isn't justified. If it's justified, it's not a presupposition.
Well, it depends on the nature of the presupposition you're speaking. Axioms are presuppositions, and then right. I could have secondary presuppositions. We have to make sure we're making a differentiation between axioms, fundamental starting points, or presuppositions, which are certain things we presuppose throughout the chain of our web of beliefs.
What do you think the word presuppose means?
It is to presuppose something. Sure. I understand what I mean, I'm a presupposition. So I would hope I know what a presupposition is.
To presuppose something means it's already unjustified. You don't have a justification for it. If your justification is revelation, then it's not a presupposition anymore. It stops being a presupposition if you say it's justified.
Well, let me see if I can word it this way. So, okay, so you have presuppositions. I would say that the nature of the presuppositions you have do not provide the necessary ingredients for intelligibility of human experience.
What do you mean? How so?
Well, whatever your presuppositions are, they're not my presuppositions, which I think are the foundation, if I'm talking about my ultimate foundation. So my claim is that whatever you're presupposing it does not provide a coherent worldview perspective upon which you can build an epistemology without running into a complete and utter skepticism.
Sure it does. How does it not do that? Show me the problem.
Well, that's my claim. Well, let's talk about it. What is your epistemology and how do you know what you know?
Okay, I think therefore I am.
Apologize beforehand, since now when we talk about epistemology, and this is one of the things that people hate about presuppositionalism, is that, I'm going to ask you, how do you know? And I don't mean to do that I don't mean to do that to be annoying.
I'm here. I want you here to do that. I want to experience what it's like to have those kind of conversations. So
it's really annoying talking to a presuppositionalist. I mean, if you look at some of the debates, it can be frustrating. So I apologize for the listeners that'll have to put up with this. But yeah. So I think therefore I am. This is Rene Descartes' cogito ergo sum. Are you familiar with Bertrand Russell's critique of that syllogism?
Yeah, he said, what is the I referring to?
Yeah. So he also pointed out that it's fallaciously circular because
No,
they,
he did not. He never said that. I can give you every quote he said. He never,
Okay.
never ever said that.
And I would like that quote if you can, and I do mean
Well,
that.
no, I mean,
We'll look that up.
I can't give you a quote of something he didn't say. He never said that. He never said it
Okay,
was
okay. I thought you said you had a that you can prove that by document. That's fine. All right. Well, so then let's explore that. Let's explore that. So, so I think, therefore, I am. Let's ask the question then. What is I?
No idea. I just know that whatever is the thinking is occurring, and that thinking is me. I don't know what I am. I could be a product of reality. I could be.
You go
What?
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I could be a product of reality, like materialism, so that the thinking is a product of some interaction in reality, or thinking and reality could be two separate things, like dualism, where you have conscious experience and material things, and they're separate, or reality could be a product of my mind, kind of like idealism. Any of those could be the case. So I don't know exactly what the I is, but I do know I exist.
Well, that doesn't follow because you just said before, thinking is occurring.
Right.
And from the premise thinking is occurring, it does not logically follow that therefore I am the one that's thinking. You can't.
No, I am the thinking. The thinking and I are the same things. They're synonymous.
Well, no, there's thinking that's occurring. What I'm asking is what is the I? Because you presuppose a particular view of existence. I want to know what you believe about
No. The thinking is the I. The I and the thinking, you can switch them. They're totally the same thing. They're completely synonymous.
I'm asking you because I want to try to understand your position. Is that when you refer to I, that presupposes some view of identity, it seems, and I want to get to what you believe about identity.
No. Remember, I just said that it could be that I am a product of reality, like materialism, or it could be that I and reality are separate, like dualism, or it could be that reality is a product of me, like idealism. Any of those are possible.
Okay.
I haven't taken a stance of which one. It makes no difference which one is the case
Sure.
because I still exist in all of them.
So if you're a product of the material world, what differentiates you from other material objects? In other words, what makes you you? That's what I'm unclear as to what you think in terms of what I means. I mean, are you a pure materialist in regards to persons? I mean, that has implications in terms of identity and things like that. I don't know where you stand, and if you don't give me enough information, there's really nothing I can say since I don't know what position you hold, and I don't want to shoot bullets in the dark.
Well, none of that is relevant to my position because my position is just I think, therefore I am.
No,
So-
it's relevant if you're asking me to, well, I think therefore I am, respond to it. Well, I can't respond to it if you don't give me enough information. So
right. Your argument was that my epistemology can't offer, or my model of reality, my metaphysics can't offer us a grounds for epistemology, something like that, right?
I'm saying that your worldview cannot provide the preconditions for intelligibility.
Right.
Even if I were to grant you, let's say I were to grant you your existence, if we can just skip that point. How do you logically deduce anything else from that?
There's some difference between my imagination and my experience.
I'm sorry?
There is some difference between my imagination and my experience. Like if I imagine a unicorn, I don't see a unicorn.
How do you know there's a difference? What is your standard to differentiate?
Because I'm imagining a unicorn and I don't see a unicorn.
Yes, but that presupposes that you already have a standard to differentiate what you think you're imagining and what's actually the case. So we get into the issue of, I hate getting into this.
No, that's entailed in the I think, therefore I am, because I'm all talking about self-referential experience here. If I am experiencing one thing but not experiencing another thing, that necessitates a difference. So it's entailed in that.
Okay, so let me get back to the original question there. So how do you build a worldview from I think, therefore I am?
Okay, so there's some difference. What?
That provide the necessary preconditions for intelligibility and knowledge.
So I think, therefore I am, I exist. Mm-hmm. I exist and reality exists, and there's some relation between these. I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And there's some difference between my imagination and my experience. And so we need some criteria to differentiate between the imagination and the experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so then we build this criteria. Now I would just go, science is the criteria I'm going to go with. And with science, I can filter things out and say, these are the imaginary things and these are the experiential things.
Okay, so science. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about that? So science is an epistemological tool for you?
Yeah, it's just a way to tell the difference between things in our imagination and things in their experience.
Okay, and the conclusions you derive from science, could you know those conclusions to be true and that they actually reflect reality?
They reflect the difference between my imagination and my experience. They don't necessarily reflect reality. They reflect the difference between my imagination and my experience.
Okay, then how from that do you use that as an epistemological tool to gain knowledge then? Because you're not really telling me much in terms of Well, it's a tool to help me differentiate between, what'd you say, that imagination and what?
Imagination and experience. So
Imagination.
conceptual and empirical, like empirical sense experience.
Right. So how does that get, or would you say that science doesn't get you knowledge? It just helps you differentiate between imagination and experience?
Well, that is knowledge. So like if I said, it appears to me that I am holding a cup, like I could be in the matrix and the cup doesn't exist,
Okay.
but it still appears to me I'm holding the cup. So the statement, it appears to me I'm holding the cup, is true. It's knowledge, even if I'm in the matrix. It
Right.
can't be false.
But you can't, wait, you can't say it can't be false. I would say that you don't know if that's true, since if you could be in the matrix, practically speaking, yes, you're experiencing a cup, but you have no way of knowing that that's actually the case. And so from that
Remember what I said? I said, it appears to me as if I am holding a cup.
yes, but
The only thing that's required for it to be true is that my sensations are the visual image I have of the world is producing this image. So it doesn't actually need to be true that the cup exists. All that needs to be true is that I see a cup.
That's right. That's right. I'm not disagreeing with that. I understand what you're saying. I'm saying is that if you see a cup, that's not the same as there actually being a cup. And so you're
right. I think you're missing the point just a little bit. So
Okay,
I apologize. When I say it appears to me I am holding a cup, that statement is objectively true. That is objectively true knowledge, independent of the existence of the cup. The cup doesn't need to exist for that statement to be true.
Okay.
So I have knowledge of the world just in that statement.
Right. Okay. So let's back up a little bit then. So the process of science and the conclusions that you draw that would appear to you, there are other fundamental assumptions that are being made in there that I'd like to see if you can justify within your perspective. So let's move along to a topic that I'm sure you're familiar with, is the issue of induction. How do you justify induction within your worldview, given that, I mean, it seems to me that you can only get what appears, so you can never know from your perspective what is actually the case. That might not be a big deal for you. You might say, oh, that's fine. But how do you justify induction? The idea that, and I know you know what induction is, but just for people listening, is the idea that the future will be like the past because it's always been that way in the past in our experience.
Right. So it appears to science that induction works, just like it appears to me that I'm holding a cup.
But it doesn't necessarily work. You could be wrong about everything you conclude in regards to that process, right?
Right, but it is still objectively true that it appears to science that induction works, just
right,
like it appears to me that I'm holding a cup.
But appearance is different than actual knowledge. So you're stuck with appearance.
I apologize, it's got to interrupt again. Remember, I can still have knowledge, objectively true knowledge that it appears to me I'm holding a cup. That's objectively true knowledge.
I understand, but you'd have no justification for believing that that's actually the case in every proposition that you would hold as a result of the process.
Right. It doesn't tell me if the cup exists. It only tells me that it's...
The only justification that you would have is things appear to be a certain way.
Right.
And I would say that particular view right there does not provide the preconditions for knowing anything about the nature of reality, unless you are saying that the nature of reality is impossible to know.
Well, remember, if I can have a single objective fact there and said, it appears to me I'm holding a cup, that is knowledge of the objective reality.
Again, I'm going to get into I don't want to get back into the whole I exist thing. I think there are issues there, but I want to just assume that I can grant you that for the sake of discussion. But when you say it's true that it appears, even if I grant you that, are you saying that it is impossible to know the true nature of reality? Are we only relegated to appearance?
So far in what I've presented, yes, we're only relegated to experience. But that experience is itself a fact about objective reality. All
right, cool. All right, but is that the only fact you can know about objective reality? Namely, that the only thing we can know is that things appear to us a certain way.
We can know the differences between the way they appear, but that's it right there. You said we don't have the relevant preconditions for intelligibility, but I just gave you all the relevant preconditions needed for intelligibility.
Well, again, if I granted you that, you can build no knowledge claims apart from that tell us anything about the way the world is. So everything you say could, in principle, be wrong, even though it's not wrong that things appear to you a certain way.
You just contradicted yourself. Everything can't. So again, intelligibility. Your objection was that my metaphysical theory does not give us the grounds to have an epistemology or explanation of intelligibility, right?
And so you're saying, let me see if I get this here. So you're saying I'm saying that your worldview does not provide the necessary preconditions of intelligibility. And
What does intelligibility mean? Give me a definition of intelligibility.
well, I would say that your worldview, if true, and the principles were applied, we couldn't know anything with any coherence. Now, granted, I do admit, I understand what you're saying, that it is objectively true to you that certain things appear to you, but that would push us back into the point that I didn't pursue further, which was the whole issue of existence. Now, if you don't understand what it means to exist, they're not giving me enough information in regards to your view of that I could push any further. That's why I, for the sake of argument, granted you existence.
Well, intelligibility, from my understanding, is just the ability to differentiate between different concepts. It's the ability to intellectually understand things. That's
okay. All right. So let's ask this question then. And I think I understand what you're saying. Let me repeat what you said, and you can tell me. Excuse me. You can tell me. You said that even though you don't know, and I'm kind of paraphrasing you, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. You don't know the fundamental aspect of the way the world really is. What you do know is that you can have. It is true that the world appears to you in a certain way.
right, and that gives me intelligibility.
Okay. All right. That was good. Okay. That's helpful. All right. So let's talk about we could talk about existence. I guess let's talk about knowledge in relation to the mind and the brain, because this will help me understand your position. When you know something, for example, the proposition, things appear to me a certain way. What is going on? What is knowledge in a worldview in which I don't want to assume. Are you a physicalist in regards to human beings?
I don't hold to an ontology. So my view is just strictly epistemological. I think, therefore I am, and then I can start describing things from this way. That's it. So I don't actually, like I said before, it could be the case that I am a product of reality and that my consciousness is a material process, or it could be the case that consciousness and material are two separate things, like dualism, or it could be the case that reality is a product of my mind, or mind in general, like idealism or solipsism. But I don't take a position on any of those, because none of those are relevant to my point. All I need to know is that I think, therefore I am, because whichever one of those is the case, you still get the same result either way. There is still some difference between my imagination and my experience in all three cases. The same difference exists. I can still say it appears to me I'm holding a cup, and it's still true in all three cases. So regardless of which ontology is the case, materialism, dualism, idealism, theism, pantheism, whatever, I still get all the same stuff I've talked about. So no matter how you change the ontology, all of my epistemology is unaffected. It's still true.
Yeah, I guess I'm having difficulty because unless the world is a particular way, in other words, would you say the world, reality is such that we can know things about reality?
Well, yeah, I think, therefore I am. That does tell me stuff about reality.
Right, but that doesn't seem to just be epistemologically related. That seems to assume some kind of ontology.
What do you mean? Because from my perspective, it doesn't assume any kind of ontology. Like it's ontology invariant. So no matter how you change the ontology, that statement is still going to be true no matter what.
And I genuinely, maybe you could help me understand this. How does that position not presuppose any ontology when you acknowledge that?
Oh, I apologize. Let me clarify. It does presuppose there is an ontology, but it doesn't tell us what that ontology is. So it could be materialism, it could be dualism, it could be idealism, it could be infinitely many possible things. It does presuppose, I guess, there is an ontology. It doesn't tell us what the ontology is. So it doesn't presuppose a particular ontology, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I guess I'm confused. Is that in other words, seems to say you have no idea what the nature of reality is. And
correct.
That's what you're saying. I'm challenging whether you could actually know what you say you know to actually be the case. I mean, you believe that nature is such that we can come to know certain things, and that seems to be an ontological commitment. And it becomes difficult to critique since I don't have enough information. I don't even know what I'm critiquing, because on key issues, which is fine. I mean, we don't know everything, of course. On key issues that would be helpful to me in furthering this kind of discussion, you're just undecided. So this would probably be, if we weren't having this discussion, I'd probably want to hang out with you a little more and kind of hash those things out with you, which I'm not sure we'll cover in the next 20 minutes.
Well, yeah. So my position is just I think, therefore I am. That is the ultimate starting point. And regardless of what the ontology is, regardless of whether or not I'm a materialist, dualist, idealism, nothing can change that. It can't make it false. Like I can't believe I exist and be wrong. It's not possible. It doesn't matter how you change the ontology. I could,
Right. It just seems to be that there needs to be some ontological context in which that statement is meaningful, and
How so?
that's where I feel as though there's a little, and I don't mean this, insulting. I think there's a little waffling going on. Is that I exist, but I don't know what that means. I exist. It's like, well, I mean, some more information would be helpful in terms of hashing that out, because I'm having difficulty seeing how we can understand what existence is without an ontological context in which existence can be defined. Because I grant, from my worldview perspective, I presuppose my own existence, and I think it's foolish to deny my own existence. I understand that, but I have proximate starting points and ultimate starting points. My proximate starting point is my own mind, because I actually have to think about stuff in order to even reason. But my ultimate starting point is the ontological truth of the Christian worldview, which gives context and meaning for the idea of existence. And so that's why, if there is no ontological commitment, to be honest, I wouldn't even know where to start, since there's not enough information in regards to what you think about existence, because you don't know what the I is. You say that it can be an infinite number of things, and it would be difficult to further the conversation at that point on this particular topic.
Oh, right. So my position is just starting with that and saying with just that one fact without saying anything about ontology. I can get intelligibility. I've got everything I need right there. So
Yeah.
why do I need to say anything about ontology? Like, ontology isn't even relevant at this point.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it is relevant. I think it's people who I speak to, and I'm not accusing you by any means of doing this, because I mean I just met you, so I don't know about you in that way. But there are people who have ontological commitments, but they don't voice their ontological commitments because it would give them a burden of proof that they don't want. And so I'm not sure if you're doing that, and I'm going to grant that you're not, because you seem like a cool guy, and I really do respect this conversation. But it can be used as a tricky move to make one's own position evasive. And if that's the case, then it becomes difficult to communicate, since I don't know where you stand on certain points, and I have insufficient information to actually give my thoughts on that particular area. So if you don't know what your ontology is, then maybe we can continue a conversation later on, maybe over the phone. We can talk a little bit more about that, and then kind of continue from there. And that's okay if you think, well, I don't know what my ontology is, and I don't know if I'll ever know. But that's something that we can continue on later, since we're not going to get anywhere, because I think I don't have sufficient information to dig a little deeper, because I'm not sure you have your worldview worked out in that sense. Although you have your epistemology there, I think that it's
Demonstrate it's not, because no matter how you change the ontology, I still get the same results.
no, I don't think so.